Hi, everybody. Welcome to Story Hour. I'm your host, Daniel Marcus. My thoroughly fabulous co-host is Laura Blackwell. And it's Wednesday evening in California, and we're back again bringing you the best in spoken word speculative fiction, or that's what we like to believe anyway. We hope you agree. We welcome work from across the huge range of speculative fiction, horror, fantasy, hard SF, space opera, your favorite species of punk, slipstream, weird dark, and so on. We also welcome new writers who have just sold their first few stories. The ink is barely dry, and award-winning seasoned pros, and really everybody in between. So, how did we get here? I started Story Hour over 5 years ago, about 5.5 years ago now, in the very early days of the pandemic. Things were kind of weird out there, not like now. Um, and I just wanted to create a place where my friends and I could get together and share our work, enjoy some community, and kind of hunker down, shelter in place against the chaos. And very shortly after I started, I asked my friend and colleague Laura Blackwell to join me in co-hosting, and we've been at it together ever since. And um, you know, things are still weird out there and trending weirder, but Story Hour is still here. We're not going anywhere. I really believe that we need stories more than ever right now, and we need community more than ever right now. So we have a little of both right here every Wednesday. Um, we rely on an ancient tradition, which is folks sitting around the flickering firelight telling lies to each other. So every week we continue this tradition. We've got two writers, have about 30 minutes each, narrating their own work. I'd like to thank SIFWA for their very generous grant, which helps us keep the lights on and keep these virtual rooms open. So thank you, SIFWA. And with that, we welcome our authors this evening, Laurence Raphael brothers and Michael Merriam. And we're going to kick off the program tonight with Michael. Michael Merriam is the award-winning author of the Weird West and steampunk series Six Guns and Sorcery. Michael's work has appeared with Carina Press, Queen of Swords Press, and Uncanny Magazine, among other venues. He's published 14 novels, novellas, collections, and over 100 pieces of short fiction and poetry. He is award-winning playwright and screenwriter, and his scripts have been produced for stage and radio. Like most artists, Michael has worked various odd jobs over the years, including short order cook. I've done that. Late night radio disc jockey. I have not done that. And manager of a puppet troupe. Cool. I haven't done that either. He lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with his wife, housemate, a fluffy cat, and an elderly dog. And you can visit his website at www.michaelmerriam.com. Michael, welcome. Take it away.
Thank you guys so much for having me back. So I think this is my third time, and I'm absolutely charmed to be here. I'm going to read a short story called Now Arriving on Track 4, because besides the Six Guns and Sorcery world, trains, planes, ships, that's my other, you'll find it all over my fiction. This originally appeared in All Worlds Wayfarer magazine in December of 2020, and I don't know if that's still available. It was on their website, but we are planning to put it into a short story collection called In Transit, due next year. So now arriving on track 4. The ghost train pulled into the station as I draped the canvas sheet over my kiosk in preparation of enjoying the party leftovers. The fifth anniversary of the St. Paul Union Depot reopening meant a bash thrown by the city and state to show off the successful project to lawmakers and other high rollers, plying them with music, free drinks, and tours of the different transit vehicles, gleaming and polished for the occasion. The party brought me little in the way of business. People drinking and celebrating aren't looking to purchase newspapers or magazines. Not that many people were buying old school paper media anymore, what with everyone from your great grandparents to tiny toddlers carrying smartphones and tablets for entertainment. My bread and butter customers were bored patrons sitting around in the great room, waiting for their train or bus to whatever destination they were fleeing toward. Chicago mostly. Not that their problems could be solved by running away to another tired old city. So I thought about leaving too. I'd sell my slowly failing kiosk, pack a bag, hop a train to California or Oregon or some other place. It sounded romantic, not feasible, but romantic. The roar of an arriving train reverberated through the depot. The huff of a steam engine, the squeal of brakes as it rolled to a stop. I glanced at the board. No scheduled arrivals, and if this mystery train was part of the anniversary celebration, it was too late. Curious, I followed the handful of staff still present. The black locomotive sat parked at the platform, steam and smoke swirling around the big wheels. Good Lord, that's the Twin Cities 400. The speaker was one of the tour guides, a stooped elderly gentleman dressed as a late 19th century train conductor. The what? The Twin Cities 400. She was the fastest train on the line between here and Chicago back in the day. Dozens of passengers dressed like extras from classic film noir, all fedoras and furs disgorged from the various carriages. As a group, they looked almost normal, but when I tried focusing on individuals, they seemed muted, faded, ghostly. They entered the depot, ignoring security's questions and attempts to stop them. Standing in front of them or reaching to grasp their arms made no difference. They became like smoke at contact, then passed the security guards by and reformed into their soft edged and pessimistic state. They were purposeful, heading toward the depot doors, fading into great blobs the further they moved from the train, until they all vanished as the steam engine rolled away from the platform. I suppose I should have been terrified. They were ghosts, or something like ghosts. Mostly I was just stunned speechless. By the next morning, I wondered if I had dreamed the whole affair. When I arrived at work to find the depot locked and under guard by serious looking men in dark suits wearing earpieces and carrying large weapons under their suit jackets, all notion of last night being unreal fled. They closed the depot for a week. I mean, you just can't go about your business after a train from the past arrives, disembarks its passengers, and vanishes into the night, right? But after a week without the reappearance of the ghost train, it was deemed safe to reopen. The news reported it as a mass hallucination, probably brought on by too much drink in Merriam. All the security guards and custodial staff on duty that night lost their jobs over the incident, and those of us they couldn't just fire received stern warnings from depot management not to speak to the press or anyone else, or we would find our contracts voided and they would deal with any lawsuits we brought. They called it a mass hallucination. They could call it a mass hallucination all they wanted. But when the legendary Hiawatha arrived in the middle of the day, a week after reopening, even I recognized it. I mean, there was artwork of the Hiawatha all over the depot. How could I not? The big Art Deco diesel engine drawing seven carriages and the domed observation car painted in Milwaukee Road colors of orange, maroon, and black squealed to a halt at the main platform. The passengers appeared more real this time as they entered the concourse, solid, less ghost-like as they walked across the building, past people waiting for arrivals and departures of more mundane vehicles. One Hiawatha passenger, a middle-aged man in a gray suit, stopped at my kiosk, picked up a Pioneer Press, and scanned the newspaper, paying particular attention to the date. He glanced at the price and looked at me. 50 cents? He asked. Most newspapers are $1 these days. I shrugged as I looked into his brown eyes. A little voice in my brain asked what the hell I thought I was doing talking to a ghost, but casual conversation was something that I was practiced at. It felt normal and easy. He frowned and tossed a heavy silver coin on the counter. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. There you go, miss. He looked around the station before getting out the front door and down the steps, past the light rail platform on 4th Street, and walked into downtown St. Paul, newspaper tucked under his arm. I picked up the coin. It was a Walking Liberty half-dollar, 1938. I waited for the coin to vanish like fairy gold. When it didn't, I pulled $1 from my wallet and exchanged it in my till for the coin in 2/4, knowing good and well the big silver coin was worth way more than its face value. I looked up to minor chaos. Security was refusing to engage the phantom passengers. The nearest one to me, a tall, thin fellow, kept muttering, "It's just a hallucination," under his breath. Perfectly normal passengers in the lounge were a mixed bag in their reactions. Some were happily recording on their phones, and by the end of the hour, I knew every social media platform supporting video would be flooded with content. Others were screaming, fleeing, praying the rosary, or watching in fascination, depending on their inclination and nerve. I looked across the mess at my friend Janet at the shine stand. She watched the phantom passengers with wonder. It took the St. Paul police a solid 30 minutes to arrive. They secured the scene, which meant they chased us all out of the building, and cordoned off a perimeter by parking cruisers with their lights flashing around the depot and then standing around with their hands on guns. Not that it did any good. By the time the police arrived, the phantom passengers had vanished or walked into the city, and the Hiawatha had long pulled out of the station. Janet and I hung around watching the whole circus until a motorcade of black sports utility vehicles arrived and disgorged a platoon of men in dark suits with large weapons. Can't call it a hallucination now, can they? Janet said. I shook my head and linked arms with her. Let's get out of here before the cops or the feds or the men in freaking black start looking for people to question. They closed the depot again, this time for a month. Everything from ghost hunters to experts in quantum mechanics investigated at the behest of local, state, and federal authorities. Rip in time and space, one physicist theorized, centered on an as of yet undiscovered nexus point. They tried to entice the trains to return in a controlled environment, the depot full of scientists, government investigators, military personnel, and paranormal researchers. They ran the Amtrak Empire Builder for 2 weeks, filled with those investigators as ringers. No ghost trains. Meanwhile, I sat at home watching my meager savings vanish and my bills pile up. I was on the second grain belt and scowling over my bank account when Janet knocked on my apartment door. We're going to the bar, she exclaimed, closing my laptop and sweeping me up. Some of us are getting together, and I've decided that includes you. She gave me a stern glare. You've been ignoring my texts. Sorry. Well, you need to be with your friends. Over nachos and beer, we watched the nonstop news coverage on the big screen TV hanging over a corner. They played a compilation of videos. Definitely not a mass hallucination. Him, a large, cheerful man who'd been one of the first security guards fired, laughed. I'd hoped for an apology from someone, but whatever. Faith, who worked at the Amtrak ticket counter, reached over and patted his arm. Maybe when this is sorted, you can come back to work at the depot. I wonder if they'll ever figure out what's happening, Janet said. She filled absent-mindedly with a lock of red hair. And why it's happening here. Faith paused, nachos raised. I watched a jalapeno fall off back to the mess of her plate. It would help, if we could talk to them. I looked at my fellows. I've spoken with one. He bought a newspaper and walked out of the building. I watched him vanish around the corner. They all stared at me. What? Janet bit her bottom lip. No one else has been able to talk to or touch to any of the um, ghosts, phantoms, Tim replied. Faith narrowed her eyes at me. Yeah, part of the never ending news cycle talking points is that we can't communicate with them. How can we know what they want? Why do they need to want anything? Why can't they just, be? Tim asked. I took a long drink of my beer and peered over the top of my bottle. Can we change the subject? I said in a low whisper. After a moment of silence, Janet smiled. Well, I'm sure they'll reopen the depot soon. When they reopened the depot to public use, the federal government refused to allow any shops it deemed unnecessary to depot operations to reopen, including my little newsstand. I heard through the grapevine that the employees and writers couldn't get through the front doors without suffering an hour of security theater. Still no ghost trains. Meanwhile, I was buying ramen noodles in bulk and doing odd assignments for a short-term temp agency. Even Janet's usually irrepressible good humor was getting strained as she faced the prospect of moving back into her parents' suburban home. Eventually, various businesses and Metro Transit took enough of an economic hit that they complained to the mayor of St. Paul, who called the governor of Minnesota, who leaned on the congressional delegation, who worked their contacts in Washington to make Homeland Security see sense. The scientific community wanted to study the ghost trains up close and held to the theory that the only way to bring back the trains was to return to normal operations, whatever that meant, which added weight to the argument to reopen the depot for real. I was allowed to open my kiosk back up in peace. Well, under the watchful eyes of stern men in suits with earpieces, but at least I was able to get back to them. Within a week, all the great old trains started arriving regularly. The 400, the Gopher, the Hiawatha, the Rocket, the Zephyr, and others, all running alongside the modern Empire builder. Passengers disembarked, walked through the depot, and into the city. All efforts by researchers, security personnel, and just the plain curious to interact with the passengers were in vain, and attempts to board the trains ended with ghost trains vanishing and bewildered looking people standing on the empty tracks. At least they hadn't been dropped from a height and injured. With no straightforward explanation forthcoming, everyone from the president in the White House to the custodians in the depot's maintenance office threw up their hands, declared this the new normal, and hence something to be turned into a tourist attraction. Come see the trains from the past in all their glory. Maybe catch a glimpse of your grandparents as they disembark. Of course, no one had identified any of these apparently time lost travelers, but that didn't stop the advertising machine. There was money to be made in this new kind of tourism, and everyone wanted a cut. Not that my little kiosk saw much of an increase in sales. 3 months after the first locomotive arrived, the first phantom streetcar rolled up at the light rail platform in front of the depot, bell ringing, and those time lost passengers climbed aboard the impossible streetcar, scattering across the metro. By then, the arrival and departure board began showing schedules for past trains and automated announcements to let people know when they would arrive and depart, with no one programming those dates and times in. It just happened. The city of ghosts. That's what the rest of the world called us. It was too much for some people. They fled the city, fled the suburbs, fled the entire state, and in the place the past took hold. I watched an echo of the long lost Metropolitan building rise up, ghostly and translucent at first, growing more solid each day as I rode the light rail from Minneapolis into work every morning. I wondered how it was sharing space with the modern office building on its old location, but I wasn't curious enough to go check that out. Okay, I was too scared. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I mean, would you? Some people, though, threw themselves wholeheartedly into the experience, like Janet. She bought herself a vintage newsboy hat and suspenders because why not? I thought she looked quite dapper. Curious tourists from all around the world would fly into the Twin Cities, take a ton of pictures, and fly home. Priests tried to banish the ghosts. The fire and brimstone types hung around outside with signs proclaiming all residents of the city of ghosts in danger of eternal damnation. The station brought in more security, which was great to see because that meant Tim was back on the job. And a good thing at that, because one fine day, a ghost passenger stepped off the Zephyr, walked up to Faith's ticket counter, and bought a coach class ticket for the Empire Builder to Seattle. With shaky hands, she passed over the boarding pass to the young woman in heels, hats, and furs. Faith nearly fainted on the spot, but Tim managed to calm her down. When the station manager approached the ghostly young woman, she didn't respond, and word was that she vanished from the Empire Builder a few minutes after it pulled out of the station. After that, occasional interactions with the ghosts occurred, with no real explanation or pattern anyone could spot. Researchers and federal agents sometimes tried to intervene in these interactions, but the phantom passengers vanished into thin air when touched or spoken to by anyone other than the person they had initiated contact with. I tried to ignore the narrow-eyed, stern glares from the agents, police, and security when they finally noticed the thing that I had figured out long since. I was the one the Phantoms interacted with the most. I expected to be swooped down on and swept off to some secret government laboratory or a prison at any moment. Instead, the authorities settled for just keeping an eye on me. The shiny, levitating, high-speed bullet train pulled into the station with a muffled whisper 6 months after the Twin Cities 400 made her first appearance. I was taking a break and shagging up Janet about a possible date after work when the speakers intoned, "The Northwest Express is now arriving on track 4." The soft hiss of the sleek machine stopping and the sudden change in air pressure inside the building killed all conversation in the station. The chrome doors of the train swished open and dozens of passengers disembarked. As they entered the station, the Union Depot seemed to exhale with release, as if whatever had caused the pressure to build had been released. Once inside, the passengers stared and pointed at the station's various interior features. as if the old Union Depot was the most wondrous thing in the world. They struck me as tourists, these strangers from the future, dressed in loose-fitting, flowing clothes in earthly browns and grays. I made a quick dash for my kiosk just in case. I mean, they might want to know when they were, right? What better way than a daily newspaper? Sitting aside my rising fears and disquiet, I settled behind the familiar counter of my kiosk, ready to do commerce. This was something I understood, a piece of normal I could grab with both hands. They did purchase papers and magazines and books. The coins sported dates like 2157, and I could only peer in confusion at the flimsy credit strips checks the future customers offered when they discovered I wasn't equipped to perform retina scans to access their accounts. The government agents confiscated all the credit chips and future coins I didn't manage to hide, handing me a form to fill out to request reasonable reimbursement pending presentation of satisfactory documentation. The only reason they weren't grabbing the older coins was that these coins were well known, if obsolete, currency. My cash flow continued to suffer. The rip in time and space theory jumped to the front with the new arrivals, and a desperate search began for the focal point, the nexus, they kept calling it. This time, the depot remained open as the researchers sought the cause of past and present arrivals. From that moment forward, all arrivals from whatever time could interact with everyone, past, future, or now. Attempts to detain or kidnap them continued to fail. They would phase out of existence like phantoms. The future travelers seemed to find the entire situation amusing and took great glee in dropping little hints to the researchers who sat and questioned them. My little kiosk was pushed into a dark and unprofitable corner as all kinds of interesting equipment arrived from the four corners of the world in an attempt to solve the puzzle before the past, present, and future of Minneapolis and St. Paul became a hopeless tangle. In my downtime, reading books from the library and checking websites, I made sure that history and current events matched my memory. Nothing seemed to have changed to me, though Janet pointed out we might not really know if a change occurred. Within days of the arrival of the bullet train, a 200-story floating and rotating skyscraper began phasing in and out of existence nightly, dominating the St. Paul skyline. This confused the city council. Should they be funding this project for the future or fighting to protect the historic integrity of downtown? I figured the real problem was now people wanted to stay out at all kinds of odd hours, making it impossible for St. Paul to roll the streets up at 7 p.m. We should check it out, Janet said one night as we were wrapping up. I bit my bottom lip. I'm not sure that's a great idea. Probably not. So head right over. 15 minutes later, we stared up at the giant floating building from the sidewalk. It is really tall, Janet whispered. A bystander drifted over to us. Trying to get in? Yeah, I replied, not really sure I wanted to enter. Okay, you just stand over on the blue platform. There's a console with numbered buttons. Pick one and you end up on that floor. He paused and then reached into his pocket, showing us a card identifying him as James Kelsey, a building inspector for the city of St. Paul. It's perfectly safe. He looked up at the building, his expression one of awe and wonder. I really want to make sure this project goes through. Janet led me to the platform where people from all the tangled times were coming and going. We picked a floor at random. Turned out there was a club on the 62nd floor with a band playing a mix of music on instruments from the past or possibly the future. I really couldn't tell what most of them were except for the upright bass. The club went quiet for a few seconds as we walked in before a sudden cheer rose and the music slammed into us like a physical blow. It was a great night of dancing, probably the most fun I'd had since this whole mess started. When Janet and I tried to settle the tab, the bartender waved us off with the casual, y'all are covered. I walked Janet back to her little efficiency apartment. I had a lovely night, Janet said. She was playing with her red hair again, smiling her little freckle-faced smile. I'm glad you talked me into going out. I really needed to have some fun. Could I talk you into coming in? I blinked at her. Are you sure? Oh, yes. Come in. Stay. I was a bit surprised and utterly pleased. I'd like that. Her lips tasted like the Manhattan cocktail she had been drinking, and her body molded nicely against mine. It became commonplace to find myself at the light rail station engaged in conversation with a mill worker living in 1933 or a solar tech specialist from 2168 while waiting for the Green Line train. I was in the middle of having one of those conversations and I wasn't paying attention. It should have been impossible anyway. I should have found myself standing in the middle of the tracks, looking chagrined as I clambered back onto the platform to wait for the proper transport from my time period. Instead, the conductor told me the fare was 10 cents. I looked up in surprise, and before I could respond, the bell rang and the big yellow streetcar pulled away from the station, taking me along. I paid with a modern dime. The conductor peered at President Roosevelt for a few seconds before shrugging and offering me a paper transfer slip. I took a seat next to the man in the gray suit who had bought the news from paper from me all those months ago. He was holding a very modern tablet, and I wondered for an instant about an antique streetcar with Wi-Fi. I casually peered over to see what he was reading. It was some sort of online news site. The masthead listed August 15, 2201 as the date, and there was a large color photo of me with black hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing my favorite yellow sleeveless blouse and blue jeans. I stood in front of my kiosk, smiling at the camera. Under the photo, in small print, it read, Teresa Roy, first opener at her Union Station Depot newsstand, 2018. I remember doing that promotional photo from last year. It looked so cheerful. The streetcar stopped before I could start reading the article over his shoulder. My seatmate looked me in the eyes. I think that's your transfer. He pointed at the sleek silver glider waiting on the crossing track. This train doesn't go to Minneapolis, he added helpfully. I exited the streetcar and walked to the waiting future version of mass transit in. If I said I was in a dream state, it might seem dramatic, but I really can't explain my state of mind otherwise. I stepped aboard, and a disembodied voice, low and soothing, welcomed me by name. The other drivers went silent, staring. Despite the futuristic climate controls and the crowd of riders, it was a quiet, uncomfortable ride to Minneapolis, punctuated by new passengers who gave me a double take as they climbed aboard. When we came to a smooth stop at Target Field, I fled, ran 3 blocks to my apartment, only to find it filled with milling strangers, past and future, peering at my personal items as if my apartment were a museum. They looked surprised at my appearance and meekly shuffled out under my glare. One grandmotherly lady dressed in loose flowing earth tones the future seemed to favor stopped, touched my cheek, and thanked me before she shuffled out. What the hell was she thanking me for? I took a moment to make sure it was my apartment in my timeline. I never thought I'd become time lost, but after the 2 transit rides today, I wanted to be sure. All my items belonged to me. The food in the fridge was fresh and looked like the groceries I had bought 2 days prior. I pulled a grain belt tall boy from the refrigerator, opened it, and took a tentative sip. It tasted fine. I was on my third grain belt when my tired brain put it all together. The truth clicked into place. Rip in time and space, centered on an undiscovered nexus point. Teresa Roy, first opener. Me. Somehow, this was all my fault. I sent Janet a text, packed a backpack and a carry-on suitcase, and caught the blue line to the airport. There, I explained to the ticket agent at the Delta counter that my trip was a sudden thing, the death of a beloved uncle in Missoula. I really needed to leave tonight. It's a nice enough city, Missoula, Montana. I picked it at random from the departure board. I sold all the odd coins and credit chips I'd accumulated, except for that very first silver $half to a collector, and bought a newsstand in Missoula International Airport from a couple looking to retire and spend their golden years living in the mountains. Janet joined me a month later, moving into my apartment and into my life as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She borrowed money from her parents and bought out the stand next to mine, selling coffee, tea, and snacks to weary travelers. I started taking classes at Montana U and decided to finish my degree in environmental studies. I wrote a personal memoir about my time in the city of ghosts. I put it in an actual trunk, too afraid of potential repercussions should I publish it. Maybe I'd leave instructions for its publication after my death. I wondered what would happen to this nexus after I died. Would it all unravel and things go back to normal? Would these time slips I seemed to cause not up worse? I didn't think so. Once you open a portal, I suspect it's hard to close. And the news article called me the first opener, which implied others. Then let us know on social media that the trains and travelers were still arriving, that the Twin Cities was still the city of ghosts. It's been a good 2 years. We were starting to think I was wrong, that maybe we could unpack the go bags, get a dog and a cat, buy a house, think about a family. But Friday night, after the last scheduled arrivals were safely on the ground and all the passengers had gone off to collect their luggage, a vintage 1940s DC-4 with the logo of the long defunct Northwest Airlines on the tail appeared out of the darkness, landed, taxied up to the terminal. The man in the gray hat gave me a cheerful smile and wave as he led a procession of phantom passengers down the concourse. Thanks.
That was thoroughly delightful. Thank you, Michael. I didn't realize until tonight I really wanted to hear a train story. So, so thanks. That was terrific. Uh, well, it's our custom here at Story Hour just to take a pause, take a breath between authors, and we're going to do that. Well, I'm going to do that. Y'all can do whatever you want, but I'm just going to take a breath, and um, we will proceed. Michael, Merriam, thank you so much, Michael. All right. Our next author is Laurence Raphael Brothers. Laurence Raphael Brothers is a writer and a technologist. He's published over 50 short stories in such magazines as Nature, Galaxy's Edge, and the New Haven Review. Laurence has also published a number of novellas and novels, including the psychedelic found family adventure, The World's Shattered Shell, and an ongoing noir urban fantasy series that begins with The Demons of Wall Street. In 2025, his books Pâtissier et Étranger and The Shadow Minister will be published by Brigid's Gate and Water Dragon, respectively. And you can check out his other books and stories at http://lawrencebrothers.com. Laurence, welcome back to Story Hour. Take it away.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. I have a bundle of three stories tonight, two flash and one sub-flash. The first has a content warning. This story, Munitions release, was published in Hell Itself. It's not a horror story. It's not particularly graphic, but it does concern itself with some very horrible content and subject matter, particularly military atrocities, the imagined death of children, and suicidal ideation. So the other two stories are much lighter in tone, and we'll proceed with a little bit of relief afterwards. So first, Munitions release. Whenever she closed her eyes, Captain Maria Hernandez, USAF, retired, fell into the dream. Always the same, always unbearable. She had a supply of modafinil left over from duty ops, but the drug could only go so far in keeping her awake. Her pulse was 150 at rest. Her chest hurt all the time. At last, desperate for release from her torment, she checked herself into the PTSD unit at the VA hospital for memory erasure therapy. Now she was wired into a treatment system, a superconducting mask over her face, psychoactive drug drip in her arm. About to enter trance. The therapist's voice was cheerful. Captain Hernandez, your stress stream should emerge shortly. We're going to have to run through the whole thing once to calibrate before we can break the loop. I apologize for putting you through this, but I'm sure we'll be able to help you. The captain didn't reply. She was already deep into the dream. Two user interface tiles floated before her eyes, overlaid on top of video imagery. Munitions release and mission cancel. She was back at her old drone controller's workstation at Creech Air Force Base. A virtual reality helmet was on her head instead of the therapy mask, and she was seeing through the camera eye of a heavily armed drone. There it was, the concrete building with the corrugated steel roof, grainy due to the magnification of the drone's optics. Intel markup glyphs hovered around the target, detailing its coordinates, hardness rating, and military value. An ad hoc enemy headquarters. A building in a rural village on the opposite side of the world from her Nevada base. Everything was nominal. No sign of civilians, no indication of any error in target designation. She tapped a tile labeled Munitions Release. At this stage, it never occurred to her to cancel. In her dream, Captain Hernandez became the Hellfire missile streaking towards the target. The concrete building swelled rapidly before her virtual eyes, but before impact, she slowed down. Instead of striking the roof of the building, she came to a halt just outside the front door. She felt a rising horror and tried to turn away, but she was unable to alter the course of the dream. The door opened and she advanced into the building, hovering in the air as if she were a quadcopter toy instead of a drone-launched missile. The captain floated into a classroom full of 8-year-olds. She saw a blackboard with words in English and Arabic, a rainbow drawn in colored chalk. No sign of the enemy. The whole class turned to look at her, but no one spoke. They behaved like she was expected. She saw no fear in the children's placid faces. She wanted to apologize to them, to beg their forgiveness. But she was a missile. She couldn't speak. There was only one thing she could do. Detonate. At that moment, she wanted to do it. Blowing up would end her, and she knew she deserved it. She needed it. The civilians didn't matter. They died every day, one way or another. She willed it, and the explosion came, and with it, the pain in her chest intensified. A fireball filled the room in slow motion. She saw children's bodies flying through the air, swirling around her like ragtag bits of trash caught in the dust devil. And then the scene went black. It was a gratifying darkness, quiet and still, but it didn't last. The therapist looked up at the dream screen mounted above her patient's recumbent body. That was a bad one, she thought. She tapped the end trance tile on her tablet. Wake up, Captain, she said. You did well. Next session will clear the trauma nexus. I'm sure of it. There was no response. She tapped the tile again. Captain Hernandez. Still nothing. It was only then that she noticed her patient had stopped breathing. Emerging from the blackness, Captain Hernandez clicked munitions release. She rocketed towards the building, slowing to a halt outside the front door. The classroom again, the children, their silent stare, their calmness, their acceptance. Fireball. Fade to black. Munitions release. The missile raced once more towards its fiery immolation in a classroom full of innocent children. She experienced it over and over, each time with a growing sense of horror and dismay, culminating in the revelation of the classroom. But each time at the critical moment, she committed to the detonation, voluntarily, eagerly even. She wanted to fade to black and the descent into oblivion. But then it began again, and again, and again. A team of medics had come and gone, taking Captain Hernandez's body with them. The therapist was alone in the empty room. Her dead patient's dreams cycled on the screen above the vacant chair, looping. She reached out to her tablet, hesitated. Her finger hovered over a tile on the UI labeled cortical stimulus, the button she would have pressed to administer therapy. She stabbed her finger down. The captain tapped munitions release. There was no other choice. When the Hernandez missile launched, she dived as usual towards the schoolhouse. But this time she felt a spark of volition. She knew what was going to happen next, and more than that, she knew she couldn't stand having it happen again. She pulled back into a screaming half loop, her rocket engines vectoring into a high G turn. Far overhead, she saw a tiny speck. The drone that had launched her already returning to overlook mode, scanning for new targets. She blinked virtual eyes, and a targeting reticle appeared over the speck. A tone sounded, lock on, and now the speck became a dot, now a tiny flying cross, and now she saw it clearly, a General Atomics Reaper 2 silhouetted against the bright blue vault of the heavens. Her last sight was the USAF, stars and bars roundel, red, white, and blue against the gray fuselage of the drone. Maria hit it square, dead on. The therapist stared at the dream screen above the empty therapy unit, disbelieving. A bloom of fire appeared high in the sky over the schoolhouse. Text scrolled over the display. Mission canceled. That's the first piece. That was not easy to sell. Probably see why. All right, the second piece is called Cautionary. It was published in Fufaraw, inspired by a Suzanne Vega story about, I think it's called A Crack Appeared in the Wall. Kim was walking home from work when she noticed the door in a blank brick wall. She was sure it wasn't supposed to be there. She walked past every day without seeing it. The door panel featured a wood carving depicting a minotaur in such high relief it appeared to be emerging from the door frame. Kim raised her hand and put her palm up against the minotaur's belly. The door swung open at her touch, and Kim walked through into another world, just as she'd hoped. She stood on a low hill, carpeted in grass greener than any she'd ever seen before, even in video games. The door behind her was freestanding, isolated from any wall, its carving a minotaur's backside. It was a sunny day in early summer when she came through, and under the pure blue dome of the heavens, a cloud drifted, impossibly white and fluffy. Off to one side of the hill, lush meadowland stretched to the horizon, fields of green and golden grass stippled with wildflowers, purple, red, and white. The pleasant humming of bees could be heard from there. In the other direction lay a forest, massive old-growth trees with thick canopies of leaves, so dark green they were almost black. Paths pierced the woods here and there, and Kim had the sense something vast, patient was waiting there, waiting just for her. The meadowland was idyllic and serene. It should have been far more appealing than the forest, and yet there was something about the dark wood that called to her. "Hello," said a voice. "This must be your first time." Kim turned to see a woman dressed only in a lilac sarong. She wasn't quite human, her pale green skin and hair, pointed ears, and violet eyes making it obvious. "My name is Moira," the woman said. Uh, I'm Kim." There was a moment when she thought, okay, now is the time to ask if there's a catch to all this. But then Moira took a step closer, and Kim forgot what she was going to say. The strange woman's eyes were violet whirlpools, and Kim thought drowning in their depths might not be that bad. Later, Kim was lying on her back on a bed of flowers in the golden meadow, Moira beside her, holding her hand as they gazed at the clouds floating overhead. "There's a couple of things about this place you should know." Kim sat up and Moira rose with her. "Here we go," Kim thought. "The catch. I knew there'd be a catch." Moira angled her chin up at the hill towards the freestanding door frame. "When you leave," she said, "you can find the door again whenever you're alone, just by looking for it on a blank wall." Kim smiled. "Sweet." "But there are two rules," Moira said. "First, when you go back, you can't tell anyone else about the place, or the door will never appear for you again." Kim smiled. "Well, that's easy enough." "Number two," Moira said. "Deep in the forest, there's a dark tower." "Seriously?" Kim asked. "Yes. And in the tower, there's a doorway to the basement. Whatever you do, don't go down there." "Not a chance," said Kim. "Not a chance." Moira just smiled. 60 years later, About that second rule, Kim said. She'd visited Moira almost every day over the course of a lifetime. The green-skinned woman looked just the same as the first time they'd met. And while Kim was here, so did she. What? Moira looked up at her. You know, Kim said, I've never mentioned it before, never even gone into the forest to look for the tower. From time to time, they had approached the boundary of the forest, but though the depths continued to hold a strange allure for Kim, Moira seemed to regard it with revulsion, so they never entered. Yes, Moira smiled. You've conformed to the rules without exception. Well, Kim said, I was thinking, if I don't just stay here, eventually I won't come back because I'll be dead, of old age. But you could just stay here, Moira said, with me. I'd like that very much. Yes, said Kim. That's what I was thinking too. But the thing is, it's been so easy not to break the rules. You've always been here for me, and I've never asked why. I've deliberately avoided it. But maybe you really want me to open that door? Maybe something is preventing you from telling me this? But why would you think that? It just, you know, how I would write the story, Kim said. And I've been so greedy all these years, so happy to be with you, to have this place as a refuge. Maybe I haven't been following the plot. What I wanted to say is, it hasn't been hard at all. If I was on my own, I'd have explored the place long ago. But for your sake, it's been easy to avoid. The only reason I'd ever go there is if you wanted me to. If you wanted me to, I'd do it no matter what was down there. But what if I can't tell you? Yes, Kim said, but maybe you can without words. If you know I'm willing to do anything for you. I feel like it's a debt I've needed to pay for a long time now. Moira said nothing. She kissed Kim lightly on the lips and got to her feet. Kim rose as well, and Moira took her hand. Kim followed as she walked silently into the forest, under the dark green canopy, through the quiet, shadowed paths, soft with ferns, rich with a scent of humus and decay. They walked together all the way to the dark tower, all the way to the basement, to the end of the story. Moira walked back to the hill alone. A new girl was there, looking around with wonder and curiosity clear on her face. Hello, Moira said. This must be your first time. The last piece is even shorter. It's practically a prose poem, kind of tongue-in-cheek, I guess. I submitted sort of as a lark to Crime Utopia for one of their noir anthologies. And for some reason, they took a shining to it and decided to title the anthology after it. It's Always Raining in Noir City is the piece. It's always raining in Noir City, or at least it seems that way. There's a glum, steady downpour when I'm at the office playing chess against the cat. I'm waiting for someone, anyone, to show up and give me something to do for $100 a day plus expenses. Could be a blonde or a brunette, a missing heiress, or a gambling debt gone bad. I'm not picky. A light, prickling mist raises my spirits when the case is fresh and new. No one's betrayed me yet. I haven't even heard my first lie. I know an answer's out there, occult meaning hidden in the obscuring clouds, waiting to emerge if only I can choose the right direction to follow. But then I get lost in that damn fog. Somehow it all goes wrong. Thunder and lightning accompanies the gunsel lying in wait for me when I return to my office. The sour stench of wet rot lingers with a pair of corrupt cops who bust up my office and scare the cat, while the relentless sound of the drops drumming against the pane tells me I'm running out of time. Then there's the deadly drizzle that comes down when forensics carry off the corpse and the police inspector pretends to commiserate me for my bad decisions. It's the body of someone I failed to protect, but maybe could have saved. I'd just been a little quicker, a little smarter, a little more understanding. Worst of all is the lull when the case is finally wrapped up, and it almost seems like the sun might emerge. But then the client tells me it's not going to work out. Not this time, not ever. And with one last caress, she walks away, leaving me destroyed as rain streaks the window, the cig burning down to nothing in my fingers, and the bitter taste of another failure in my mouth. But dismal as they are during the rain-sodden days, the streets are beautiful at night in Noir City, with garish neon and taillights gleaming off the slick black pavement, and that rich, wet earth scent rising all around me. The chilly trickle down the back of my neck is like the city's own cool, perverted kiss. Sometimes, when the last case was a really bad one, I think about going somewhere else, anywhere else. But the realization that I've been leaving those streets behind changes my mind. When that happens, I hunch down into the collar of my trench coat and light another cigarette, and it tastes good for a change. Then I turn and walk into the nearest dive of a bar and order a double straight up. I slam it back, and the fire burns down my gut and makes me strong again. I go home to my cat. I set up the pieces for another game.
Oh, those were great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure as
Enjoyed
always.
all of those. Oh, boy, Laura, what fun. Another story hour. Thanks very much, everybody. We have Laurence Raphael brothers, Michael Merriam, a really fine program, and another week. So next week, Laura and I are taking the week off for Thanksgiving. So we will see you on December 3rd when we will have Jenna Hanchey and James R. Gopinski joining us, and hopefully all of you. I want to thank again our wonderful authors tonight, Laurence Raphael brothers, Michael Merriam. I want to thank my co-host, Laura Blackwell, and especially I want to thank all of you who are listening, for coming back and helping us make this a very special place. So thanks. Good night, everybody.